Imagine a world slowly recovering from two devastating global wars, where old empires clung desperately to their last vestiges of power, even as a wave of nationalism swept across the globe. This was the 1950s, a time when nations yearned for self-determination. And at the heart of this unfolding drama lay a narrow strip of water in Egypt, a strategic choke point that had for decades been the lifeblood of global trade and the fuel line of Western industry, the Suez Canal. Its control was not just about shipping, it was about power, prestige, and profoundly about money. For nearly a century, the Suez Canal, built by French ingenuity and Egyptian labor, had been controlled by British and French interests. It was the fastest route from Europe to Asia, crucial for transporting oil from the Middle East to Western factories and homes. But in Egypt, a charismatic young leader named Gamal Abdel Nasser rose to power, embodying the aspirations of a new era. Nasser envisioned a truly independent Egypt, free from foreign influence, and planned grand projects like the Aswan Dam to modernize his nation. Nasser's ambitions, however, clashed with the Cold War politics of the time. He sought funding for the Aswan Dam from both the Soviet Union and the West, playing a dangerous geopolitical game. Initially, the United States and Britain offered substantial loans, but when Nasser recognized communist China and made an arms deal with Czechoslovakia, Western leaders, particularly U.S. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, grew wary. They decided to pull the rug out from under him, withdrawing their offer for the dam's financing in July of 1956. This withdrawal was a catastrophic blow to Nasser's prestige and his vision for Egypt. It was an act of economic warfare meant to humiliate him and perhaps even topple his regime. But Nasser was no ordinary leader. He refused to back down. Instead, he saw this as an opportunity, a direct challenge to Egyptian sovereignty, and a chance to assert his nation's independence on the global stage. His response would shake the world and redefine international power dynamics for decades to come. On July 26, 1956, Nasser delivered a thunderous speech in Alexandria. To the astonishment of the world, he declared the nationalization of the Suez Canal Company. The cheers of his people were deafening. He announced that the revenue from the canal, once controlled by foreign shareholders, would now fund the Aswan Dam project. This wasn't just about a dam, it was a defiant declaration that Egypt would control its own destiny and its own vital resources.
The reaction from London and Paris was immediate and furious. The Suez Canal was a cornerstone of their global trade, a symbol of their dwindling imperial might, and a crucial artery for their oil supplies. British Prime Minister Anthony Eden saw Nasser as a new Hitler, a dangerous dictator who needed to be stopped. France, embroiled in a struggle with Algerian nationalists, viewed Nasser as a supporter of anti-colonial movements and a direct threat to its remaining influence in the region. Both nations felt their economic and geopolitical standing was directly threatened. They feared that Nasser's move would inspire other nations to seize foreign assets, destabilizing the entire post-colonial order. More critically, an interruption of oil supplies through the canal could cripple their economies. They saw only one solution: military intervention to reclaim control of the waterway and topple Nasser from power, believing this was the only way to safeguard their financial and strategic interests. But going to war against Egypt presented numerous international hurdles, so Britain and France concocted a secret plan with Israel. Under the scheme, Israel would invade the Sinai Peninsula, pushing towards the canal. This would provide Britain and France with a pretext to intervene as peacekeepers, ostensibly to separate the warring parties and secure the canal, but in reality to seize it back and remove Nasser. It was a thinly veiled attempt to justify an invasion. On October 29, 1956, the Israeli forces launched their attack. True to the secret plan, Britain and France issued an ultimatum for both sides to withdraw from the canal zone, which Egypt predictably rejected. Then, on October 31st, Anglo-French air forces began bombing Egyptian airfields, paving the way for paratroopers and an amphibious invasion. The world watched in shock as two former colonial powers, alongside Israel, launched a blatant act of aggression against a sovereign nation. The invasion sparked international outrage. The United Nations General Assembly swiftly condemned the action, demanding a ceasefire and withdrawal. But the most significant pressure came from an unexpected quarter, the United States. President Dwight D. Eisenhower, furious at not being consulted and fearing a wider conflict that could push Egypt closer to the Soviet Union, refused to support his allies. He saw their actions as a dangerous return to old-style imperialism that jeopardized the Cold War balance.
Eisenhower's administration made it clear that there would be severe economic consequences for Britain and France if they did not withdraw. For Britain, already facing a balance of payments crisis, the threat was particularly dire. Sterling, the British currency, came under immense pressure as global investors, sensing instability, began selling off their British assets. The U.S. threatened to block British access to crucial international monetary fund loans, which were desperately needed to stabilize the pound. The financial squeeze was excruciating. Britain's foreign exchange reserves were dwindling rapidly, dropping by hundreds of millions of dollars in a matter of days. Without American financial support, a full-blown sterling crisis and national bankruptcy seemed imminent. For a nation that had once ruled a quarter of the globe, the humiliation was profound. Their economic vulnerability was laid bare for all the world to see, a stark reminder that military might alone could not sustain an empire. Simultaneously, the U.S. leveraged its control over global oil supplies. They refused to provide emergency oil shipments to Britain and France to compensate for the blocked Suez Canal. With their primary energy artery choked off and American pipelines closed, both nations faced a severe energy crisis. Rationing was introduced in Britain, and industries faced shutdowns. The message was clear. Without American oil, their economies would grind to a halt, forcing a difficult choice between pride and economic survival. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union, seeing an opportunity to expand its influence, issued its own threats, even hinting at rocket attacks against London and Paris. While largely rhetorical, these threats further ratcheted up the international tension. The convergence of American financial pressure, an oil embargo, and Soviet bluster created an untenable situation for the invading powers. They were diplomatically isolated, economically vulnerable, and militarily exposed. Under intense pressure, Britain and France reluctantly agreed to a ceasefire on November 6th. Their troops, alongside Israeli forces, began to withdraw from Egyptian territory. The Suez Crisis was a catastrophic political and economic defeat for both nations, especially Britain. It exposed the limitations of their post-war power and their heavy reliance on American financial goodwill, effectively ending any pretense of independent imperial foreign policy. It was a humiliating surrender of their fading global influence.
The Suez Crisis marked a definitive turning point in global history. For Britain and France, it signaled the undeniable end of their imperial dominance. The economic strains of maintaining an empire, combined with their financial dependence on the United States, made it clear that their days as world powers in the traditional sense were over. They were forced to confront the harsh reality of a new geopolitical order, one dominated by the two emerging superpowers. The United States emerged as the undisputed leader of the Western world, demonstrating its immense financial and diplomatic power. Eisenhower's willingness to stand up to his allies underscored America's new global responsibility and its commitment to preventing a wider conflict, even at the cost of traditional friendships. This solidified American influence in the Middle East and its role as a global economic and political arbiter. The Soviet Union, despite its rhetorical threats, also gained prestige, presenting itself as a champion of anti-colonial movements and further extending its influence in the Arab world. The crisis highlighted the volatile nature of the Cold War, where local conflicts could quickly escalate and become proxy battlegrounds for the superpowers, each vying for ideological and economic control over crucial regions and resources. Perhaps the most enduring economic impact was on global oil. The temporary blockage of the Suez Canal and the disruption of pipelines from Iraq and Saudi Arabia underscored the West's vulnerability to Middle Eastern oil supplies. It led to a frantic scramble for alternative sources and accelerated investment in supertankers capable of circumnavigating Africa, which would ultimately reshape the economics of global shipping and crude oil transport. The crisis also solidified the strategic importance of the Middle East, not just for its oil,
but as a critical geopolitical chessboard. Nations began to understand that whoever controlled the flow of oil could wield immense economic and political power. This realization would fuel decades of intervention, conflict, and complex alliances in the region, all rooted in the scramble for energy security.
For Egypt, while militarily defeated, Nasser emerged with a significant political victory. The canal remained nationalized, and his defiance against the old colonial powers resonated throughout the developing world, making him a hero of Arab nationalism. Egypt gained full control over a vital economic asset, charting a course towards greater economic independence, even as it navigated the complexities of Cold War alignments. The Suez Crisis also highlighted the nascent power of international organizations. The United Nations deployed its first-ever peacekeeping force to separate the combatants, demonstrating a new approach to conflict resolution that relied on multilateral diplomacy rather than unilateral military action. This marked a step towards a more interconnected world, albeit one still deeply divided by Cold War ideologies and economic interests. In the decades that followed, the lessons of Suez continued to reverberate. Nations learned that economic leverage could be as potent as military force, that resource control was a critical aspect of sovereignty, and that the global financial system was a powerful tool in international diplomacy. The crisis accelerated decolonization and fundamentally altered the economic landscape of the latter half of the 20th century. The Suez Canal, a man-made shortcut designed for trade, became instead a crucible that forged a new world order. It taught us that economic control over vital arteries can trigger conflicts, but also that financial power can halt military might. The crisis proved that even in the face of perceived threats, the global economy can be weaponized, forcing empires to concede and reshaping the very foundations of international power. Its legacy reminds us that history is often written not just on battlefields, but in bank accounts and trade routes. The story of Suez is a stark reminder that in the grand theater of financial and economic history, the strategic control of vital resources and trade routes remains a constant source of global power and conflict. It's a testament to the fact that money isn't just about wealth, it's about leverage, influence, and ultimately the ability to shape the destiny of nations. And sometimes, a single choke point can determine who rules the world.